to the cloud. All right, Stephen.
Okay, thanks, Mike. And welcome everyone to our March NCyTE member meeting. And I'm excited about this topic because and I know all of the panel members and worked with them in cybersecurity competitions or whatnot, or the CAE community. So we're going to have a few questions, but the way we're going to work this, I'm going to let each one of the panel members introduce themselves pretty quickly, just to talk about their title, their competition connections, and their organization. So we have, and I'm going to just read them off here. But Jake Mihevc is with Mohawk Valley Community College. Franz Pear is with Cyber Skyline. They host the NCL competitions. Morgan Zante, City University of Seattle. David NCyTE is the NCL commissioner. He's also from California State University, Chico. And then Dan Manson, Cal Poly Pomona College of Business. So I'm going to start out. Jake, we'll let you start with introducing yourself. We'll just go down the line here based on what was on the presentation as far as introductions. So go ahead, Jake.
Well, thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here. I'm Jake Mihevc from Mohawk Valley Community College. I serve as the PI for the NCAE Cyber Games project, which is designed as a first step for students that want a team competition and would like to develop some familiarity with the cyber competition space. And we're just completing our third season. We serve about 1,000 students per season, from about 100 different CAE schools. And my roots were in the CNY hackathon. We started the CNY hackathon here in the Mohawk Valley in 2013. In my role as the PI for the NCAE Cyber Games project, I've also been tasked with developing visualizations about the cybersecurity competition landscape, as well as working to evidence competencies within competitions. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jake. Franz.
All right, thanks, Stephen. So hello, I'm Franz Pear. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Cyber Skyline. As Stephen mentioned, we help host the National Cyber League competitions. We also support the NSA cyber exercise, as well as the CISA's President's Cup. And a lot of my focus has been on how do we use competitions as a way to really help students prepare for a career in cybersecurity, making sure that the challenges and the experiences that they have are very practical and give them experiences that will impress employers when they go for an interview.
Thank you, Franz. Okay, Morgan.
Okay, I'm Morgan Zantua. I am the director for the Center for Cybersecurity Innovation. That's our CAE center at City University of Seattle. I'm also the PI on several grants to train high school and middle school teachers to introduce cybersecurity to their schools. We have included competitions in that. And then I have been working with Dan Manson, supporting him, on some research grants around evidencing competencies in competitions. And this is a fake background. I'm at the PRCC DC today. I will be a room judge and have been supporting competitions since about 2013 in any way I can.
Thank you, Morgan. David.
Yeah, hi, I'm David NCyTE. I'm the NCL commissioner for about the last 5 years or so. In NCL, as Franz started off talking about, we do host a spring and fall competition. Our spring competition is starting up real soon, and we aim for probably about 10,000 participants, high school through college. I'm also an assistant professor in Northern California at Chico State, primarily teaching cybersecurity classes. And also I'm newly just joined on the CAE community, cybersecurity community of interest with Jake. So there we also talk about cybersecurity competitions. So if you want more information on cybersecurity competitions, join us on that as well.
Thanks, David. Hey, Dan.
Hi, I'm Dan Manson. I'm Cyber Program Coordinator for Cal Poly Pomona. I focus on everything outside the classroom. I went to my first cyber competition, 2007, the Midwest Collegiate Cyber Defense Competition, and I've been drinking competition Kool-Aid ever since then.
Thanks, Dan. Dan is a great mentor for me on competitions. So, okay, so here's the first question that we have, and I'll let you just chime in first, Jake, on this one. So, what cybersecurity competition opportunities are available for students?
Well, thank you. There are many. And in fact, some of the challenges are related to what competition is best for any given faculty member and any given group of students. And the NCAE Cyber Games is designed for students that have never competed before or are very new to competition. And our mission is to make sure that they have a great experience. They get to understand the competition environment, which can be pretty intimidating at times, and that they want to move on to another competition. As I've worked in this role, it has been very clear that we needed a visualization of some kind to start to just understand the landscape. And through our grant and our project with the CAE community, we produced the CAE Competitions Atlas. And I will share my screen very briefly and just talk through the Atlas so that everyone is there and everyone knows what we're talking about. We very much appreciate the input from the NCyTE community and anyone else who'd like to help co-create this and take the next step forward. This illustration was developed based on the annual report data for all of the CAE community. So there are 440 schools in the CAE community right now. In the annual report, they have to let us know what competitions they engage with. And we built this visualization based on that data. The boxes are relatively the size of the competitions as far as how many schools engage with them. And you see some color categories down here about which of them fall into admittedly arbitrary categories that we defined. I'm very happy to hear some feedback on that. It also does some things, really nice things like show pathways. So if a CAE school said that their students competed in both the US Cyber Games as well as here the cyber over here, you'll see these pathways that connect all these different competitions. And for the benefit of David and Franz, I will click on NCL, and you'll see that NCL is not only the largest box on the screen, but it also has the most connections with other competitions. Same thing here with NCAE Cyber Games. Growing in size, connected to lots of other competitions. And one of the things that this illustration shows is how it really is a pathway for most students from one competition to another, as is our intent as we built this community together. I'll also note we have on each competition, we scraped all the data from the website. There are easy ways to register. There are details. There's a view on the map. But the thing that we're working on right now and we'd like to develop with feedback from everyone is the pathways. Trying to define pathways for faculty and students through competitions. And here this is a beta, and we've just kind of put up what our impression of some common pathways are. For example, in high school, students can compete in PICO CTF and Cyber Patriot. Early in their college experience, they can participate in the NCAE Cyber Games and NCL. And later in college, perhaps CCDC, CPTC, Cyberforce. If they're into infrastructure defense, here's a common pathway from our perspective on infrastructure defense. And then offense. Offense is a unique category as well within competitions. And so these pathways are one of the areas of refinement that we're hoping to work on. And I think that website illustrates a little bit of the ecosystem of the cybersecurity competition world that we all are working within. And it's a first attempt to visualize it.
Great. That's fantastic. I love that pathway map you have there. That's great. So I'm going to ask Friends and David also to talk. You mentioned Cyber Skyline and NCL. So maybe Franz and David, you could also give some feedback on what cybersecurity competition opportunities are available for students and how what you've done. I know the platform you provided, Cyber Skyland, also gives other competitions, as you mentioned.
Exactly. Franz, you want to go first?
Sure, I can go first. Building off a little bit on what Jake mentioned, I think you really want to consider kind of the students that you're looking at and the objective of what you're looking for them to do, and make sure that you're selecting a competition that has a good mapping for the outcomes that you're looking for. Of course, we run the National Cyber League. If you are looking for other resources to find other CTFs, there's also CTF Time that has a big listing of all the different CTFs that are out there. Some things to keep in mind are, a lot of CTFs are kind of done as a hobby project of someone's just like, hey, I'm very into cybersecurity. I want to make some challenges and have people join. And those could be a lot of fun for students. If you have students who are doing this for the first time or they're still pretty new at this, those might not necessarily be the most comfortable for them because typically, they're more just like, hey, I built this on the side, like go and you can play with it. And then if you're looking for more kind of guided solutions, I think like probably the bigger ones that you saw on the map there that Jake put up, those have a lot more kind of like practice resources and are a little bit more beginner friendly. At least for National Cyber League, our goal has been to create a very wide set of topics and challenges as a way for students to kind of like dip their toes into things and explore. And then when they start getting closer to graduation, really making sure that those the challenges in there are going to, be very real world. And we kind of assume that there's still a lot of instruction that they're getting from the classroom as well. And there are more kind of like guided labs that we also do. We do have the Cyber Lab kit, which is kind of like a combination of here's a practice environment and a CTF that is kind of more, at your own time. It's a little bit less like sometimes students can feel like overwhelmed with the idea of the competitive aspect. I think that sometimes that we've seen them be uncomfortable with having their name on the leaderboard like that. And so maybe doing something smaller scale like that might be something that is more accessible to some of your students. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of just my general thoughts on that is there's so many resources out there. Actually, the harder question is not finding out what CTFs there are. It's which ones are going to be the right for my students. David, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So my role is NCL commissioner is to work with coaches, which are instructors, and have those instructors work with their students because cybersecurity competitions can be amazing in terms of getting students interested in cybersecurity and then giving them, hands-on training and experience with it. But it can also be a big turnoff for them as well. So if they're jump into a competition and they can't solve anything, then they might be, okay, well, this isn't right for me. This isn't the right direction. So one thing that I want to make sure we do, that's one thing we do with NCL, is make sure that, the instructors, the coaches are giving students the right resources to be comfortable. So when they start a competition, they can at least solve some challenges. And then from there, they can grow and continue to solve challenges. So we want to provide a good on-ramp for those students so that they have a good experience and they want to keep competing rather than try to compete and not solve anything and be turned away. So one thing that we have with NCL is the gym, and that is a great walkthrough where we provide solutions and videos of how to solve challenges. And there's as Jake showed, there's so many competitions out there. And on top of that, there is a ton of resources out there as well for instructors to get their students prepared and ready to participate. Because like I said, I think that's a big piece of competitions is getting students ready and comfortable to participate.
It's great. Thanks, David and Franz. And so, Morgan and Dan, I'll let you also, since you're working on the CAE competitions, community of practice, what are your thoughts on this? What cybersecurity competition opportunities are available for students? And I know you've done some interviews as well of students, so go ahead.
I'll start, Morgan, jump in, and then I'll put up the box. Morgan and I have been doing some very interesting research the last several years, interviewing students and some coaches as well that have had success in competitions. So we wanted to know, what are the reasons people succeed? The interviews have yielded some very, very interesting findings and themes. I'm going to go ahead and put up the box.
And the title of our research, by the way, is Evidencing Competencies Through Competitions, because one of the challenges I think we're all aware of is addressing your first job out of university or college or even high school to secure a job. So we talk about the competencies that people will develop, and the other important thing is how aware are people of what they are capable of doing in order to literally sell themselves because of their education and their capabilities. Dan, do you want to add something about our 4 themes that the participants?
So in the competency center, the Career Preparation National Center, we have an ABCDE approach to competencies that are mapped to the DoD Cyber Workforce Framework and the NICE framework. The most interesting one is the last one, E, which is employability. And employability, we found, relates directly to soft skills as much as technical skills. It also relates directly to the students' self-feelings about competence and confidence. If a student doesn't internalize what they gain from a competition, it's hard for them to tell their story when they go through the interview process. And so in the box here, you see 4 stages. If you want to know about the unconsciously competent to consciously competent, Morgan is an expert in that. And the themes that we have, the successful students that we interviewed, they demonstrated empathy toward other members of their team. They also developed empathy toward their customer in some of the competitions, the Collegiate Cyber Defense competition, Collegiate Pen Testing competition. You have a customer that you present to, and that leads into knowing your audience. They also understand how to build a team, what makes a good team. And what we found is that a good team likes each other and wants to spend time with each other, socialize with each other. So it becomes more than just showing up together for the competition. And then the 4th theme is transferring competition skills to employment. The students that are successful in competitions understand what they are learning in the competition and how it relates to the real world. So we really have great stories. To me, it's like sports stories, but I'm hooked on thinking that cyber competitions are a sport. And I really believe it makes a huge difference for students as opposed to saying, well, I'm going to go to class, I'm going to do well in my classes and get a degree. I tell my students what you do outside the classroom is just as important as what you do in the classroom. I'll stop there, Morgan. You want to continue?
Okay. So, having spoken to a lot of hiring managers, they will invariably say, everyone goes to class. What else have you done? And getting those students to be able to articulate the fact that they have done competitions. Now, we don't want to underestimate the fact that the students are putting in anywhere from 5 to 20 hours a week extra, honing their skills. Invariably, when Dan and I interviewed people, when we'd say, what's the most important thing that you learned from competitions? Maybe 2% of the people had anything to do with technical skills. They talked about, and I know the term is soft skills, but we like to think of them as critical skills, because these are the skills that hiring managers look for. And quite frankly, these are the hardest things for people to learn. Now, I noticed that there was somebody here from a high school. And Dan and I had a chance to talk to some phenomenal people, some of whom had been competing since middle school.
Mhm.
Okay. There were some late bloomers. In fact, our first person that we interviewed was a late bloomer. And that individual was the first one who said to us, when Dan said, what's the most important thing that you learned in these competitions? This individual, without hesitation, said empathy. And that set the tone for what we were seeing competitions do. It's almost like that X factor, because it's hard to give somebody a grade for empathy. And going back to that, the four boxes of conscious competency, just by doing the interviews with these 40-odd students or 40 students, when they started talking about themselves, it was like the lights came on for some of them. Now, for some of the people who'd been competing since middle and high school, oddly enough, they led the interviews. They had that level of competency. And it's very easy to understand why. And Dan, you want to share this quote about the employability factor because this was one of your contacts. I want you to be able to say this. Their earning potential, because we know that all these jobs are coming out and they say, well, you want to have 3 years of experience. Unmute.
I really do want to say this, that when I hear about the hundreds of thousands of job openings, it's a myth. There are ghost jobs out there, and most of the jobs require experience. So I don't like the hype that's around, oh, cybersecurity is something easy to get into and you can make a lot of money. It really has bothered me more and more. Yes, cybersecurity pays well. Cybersecurity is a hard profession. It's one of the hardest professions there is. And most employers do not want to hire beginners. They want a track record for those they hire. Competitions are a way to build that track record. You can get something equivalent to experience if you do well in cyber competitions. But to do well, it's hard to do well. So you get out of it what you put into it. And I do refer to those who play in competitions as cyber athletes. And I do believe that you need an athletic mentality to succeed in cyber competitions. And if you do that, you greatly increase your chance of going pro.
Okay, great. So this kind of what you've been talking about leads into the second question we had on how do cybersecurity competitions prepare students for the workforce, like developing their technical expertise and business ideas, their ethical decision making in cybersecurity, team building, social skills, and confidence building, and then how the competitions support interview preparation and whatnot. So since you're on a roll here, Dan, I'm going to let you start with kind of this good segue what you already been talking about, and maybe you can share some of the feedback you've had from students in those interviews.
Right. So that, the students pride themselves. The ones who are successful in competitions take immense pride in their growth because of the competitions. But it's not the ones who really are successful combine the soft and the technical. One of the best interview quotes we had is a student who competed in the collegiate pen testing competition, which is a pen testing competition. You have to write a detailed report and present to the customer. And he said he felt a very strong need to have integrity in his work. That when you're doing a pen test, you can mess up a company. And so there was something they did that caused something to not work on the company end, and they took full ownership of it, and they said, this is how we fixed it. So the ability of a student to appreciate what you need to succeed with a customer, I think is critical for students going into this field. You're not doing technology for technology's sake. You're doing it for a business. You're doing it to help a business achieve objectives.
And another student also made the comment that in doing the presentation phase of this, I think this was an individual that was in both CPTC and CCDC, the understanding that everything that they were doing was there to support the business. And if we can get our technology people to start to realize that they must be able to communicate and know what drives their customer, makes them incredibly valuable to any company that's hiring them.
Okay, that's good. So I'll defer also to Franz and David about this question. How do the cybersecurity competitions prepare students for the workforce? And I know a little bit about how NCL works because I've participated since about 2012, I think. So, but go ahead. One of you all take that.
Sure. So, kind of going off of what we just heard in terms of preparing students and while they're doing interviews at that potential employer, we've done some interviews with students as well that are currently in the cybersecurity workforce that competed. And one thing that came up quite a bit was that students really like to talk about cybersecurity competitions during the interview process because, one popular question is, what challenge did you face and how did you overcome it? And that's such a perfect cybersecurity competition question that students jump right in. So students tend to use that as a good talking point for interviews. And I know employers love to hear about that. Another thing that we have to help students prepare for job searching and for their resume is we have a scouting report. And that scouting report maps with a NCyTE framework in the work roles and what each of so ours is a CTF type of competition. So within that, we have lots of categories. And in those categories map to the NCyTE work roles. And so what we do is we give students the scouting report that shows what particular challenges, how they map, and how well they did in each of those categories so they can hone in on, what exactly in cybersecurity they want to do, what they like, and also what they've proven they're good at. And I think that's another good thing about with competitions is, a lot of students say, hey, I want to go work in cybersecurity, but that's such a huge field. I want to hear my students say once they've taken my class, not, hey, I want to get a job in cybersecurity, but specifically what in cybersecurity interests them, right? What particular thing do they want to do? And I think doing competitions helps them identify that. Did you want to add anything, Franz?
Yeah, I'll add that a big part of when you're looking at how do you support students getting a career, getting a job, it's important that they understand that there's no kind of like silver bullet. There's no like, hey, if you do this, you will automatically get a job. And Dan was talking about this a little bit, where it's something where what is very beneficial is the experience, being able to talk about it in the interview, but also the mindset that the students have with the problem solving. So if you have students who are going in and they're just following the motions and they're like, well, I competed in a cyber competition, I should be able to get a job, right? Like if you're just going through the motions of just signing up and just, going through it, you're going to get very limited value. And so this is something that we try to do a lot when we have players who sign up for the NCL is we do a lot of communication of, hey, really this is a sandbox, is for you to learn and to grow. But if you kind of just sit in the sandbox and you don't do anything, then that's, you're not getting a lot of value out of that. And so that would be one thing I would recommend, that you really encourage your students not just to kind of sign up and do a CTF, but really think about, what are the outcomes, what are the skills that they're trying to develop, and making sure that they're actually going and doing that. Because we've seen some students who they just do it so that they can say they can do it, and then they kind of feel like that they weren't given all the guidance that they needed. And I think part of that as well is, as they're going through their education, it's very straightforward, of like, you finish your courses, then you graduate, you finish this year, then you go to the next year, then you go to the next year, right? And so there's a lot of, you just go and complete it and you move to the next stage. This is a point in their life where they have to kind of learn that isn't the case anymore.
Yeah, good point. And I know that NCL has kind of aligns with like some of the certifications, and also with the work roles and KUs, I think. So that is a good awareness of what kind of where they can help them, kind of guide them in what jobs they might be interested in, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I posted a link in the chat to one of the sample scouting reports that we put together. But we've mapped our content to the NICE framework and the CompTIA Security Plus. And so if you have students who are looking to get certifications as part of their pathway to getting a job in cybersecurity, competitions are a very good way for them to apply what they're learning. A lot of students I've seen, they do well with hands-on learning. And so if they're kind of reading a lot of textbooks and just a lot of material, and they're kind of needing to actually experience something firsthand for the information to really internalize, then cyber competitions are a very good way for them to get that.
Great. Jake, I'll let you wrap this one up on how do cybersecurity competitions prepare students for the workforce.
Sure. At the very beginning of competition experiences, we found that competitions are very helpful in helping students learn what they need to learn. When they get into a practical environment that they see as a valid evaluation of, are they ready for the workforce, they have an idea and the ability to inventory their own skills and see what they need to learn. And we allow students to compete in our competition twice before we gently encourage them to move on to another competition. And we often see that between year one and year two, when we get that feedback consistently from students, is, wow, year one, I really didn't contribute much. I didn't understand what I needed to do. And then they come back year two in a leadership position, and they've really developed those skills in the intervening year, and they've really come a long way. I'll also add that I just defended my dissertation on the experiences of women and girls within the NCyTE Cyber Games. And one of my findings was that women and girls found that it was a huge accomplishment just to understand the competition environment. And it is a very complex environment. You have a scoring engine, you have virtual machines, you have a web server that's talking to a database server, you're working through a virtual console. And so I think it really, just understanding a complex virtual environment is a big step forward for lots of participants as well.
I want to add one thing, that I really believe we have an obligation as colleges with cybersecurity program to partner with high schools that have cybersecurity programs and do cybersecurity competitions. So Jay Geringer is on. I had several years of working closely with Jay and other schools in LA Unified, and I posted a video I did on Jay's team winning the Cyber Patriot National Championship. But if you want talent in your college program, don't settle for walk-ons. Partner with your high schools that have champions and want to do this.
All right. That's a good point. Kind of like regular drafting of students for other athletic programs. So
we recruit. We actually actively recruit students from local high schools.
Great. That's a good idea. Okay, this is the last question, and we're going to, and so, and then we'll try to answer some questions from from our audience. So, how can we make cybersecurity competitions more accessible to the students? Like, what's your strategies to reduce or cover participation costs? How do you reach students with a low socioeconomic status? So, how about we'll start with Franz and with David first.
So I'll speak from a preparation side, and then I'm sure David will have a lot of suggestions as well. So when it comes to making sure that your students are prepared, a lot of it is mindset. Make sure that when your students are going to be participating in a CTF or a cyber competition, you explain to them that this is not the same thing as an exam or a test, right? This is not a standardized exam. I've seen some students who go in trying to aim for like an 80% or a 90%, and that's just not reasonable with a lot of these. They really are meant to test you. If you have too many students getting 100%, then it probably wasn't the most challenging experience. And you know, the students probably could have learned more if you had more challenging content in there. So that's a big shock because, you know, just to put things in context, for NCL, the average score that we see is a 33%, if you just took the raw percentage, which sounds terrible, but the reality is that most students coming in are beginners, and beginners are not going to be able to solve all of the challenges. And just being able to make students comfortable with that idea is very, very important, because otherwise, I think David said this earlier, you know, if they do the wrong competition, they can actually be kind of disincentivized and thinking, oh, well, this isn't, you know, this isn't what I'm interested in. And, you know, that may or may not be the case, but we wouldn't want that to be the case just because of the difficulty level, and just, you know, perception. So highly recommend doing that. As well, there are tons of free learning resources out there. I know that if you're a CAE school, Jake, with the NCIE, Cyber Games has been a great way for students to prepare. There's also other platforms like Pico CTF that have like free learning resources. Highly recommend that you try those as well. But most of what I've seen is that the students just need a lot of motivation, and trying to kind of like over prepare can be a double-edged sword, because you never know what to expect in a lot of these competitions. They do have new content all the time, and so it's really about kind of making sure that the students are eager and motivated to do a lot of self-learning, and you know, be comfortable with the idea that they're not going to get a perfect score. They're not going to get an A or a B score, and that's okay, right? It's all part of the process. Yeah, as it comes to like kind of the financial aspect, it's a little bit more tricky. There are plenty of free CTFs out there. NCL, it does cost $35 per student. We do have a free registration waiver program, which we closed it for this spring, but we'll be opening it again for the fall for students who need some financial assistance. But we've seen that sometimes schools are able to get funding from corporate sponsors. Sometimes they are able to tap into the budget for student engagement at their school as well. Especially if there's a club, sometimes the clubs are able to get funding from the school. And another thing as well is that like you might also want to take a look at the alumni that you have who've graduated through your program, who've done cyber competitions. If we've done our jobs well of educating them, making sure that they're successful and giving them a great experience, then hopefully they're incentivized to, you know, be interested in mentoring some of the students in the program now, and potentially contributing some funding to help them participate if that's needed. That I think that would also help a lot with just improving the quality of the program as a whole as well. David, is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, so kind of going off of the getting the alumni involved. So we at our cybersecurity club at Chico State, our alumni are pretty active. And what alumni have done in the past is they'll come to meetings and say, all right, if anyone cannot afford the $35, they will pay for the entry fee for those students. So they recognize how important it is for students to be able to participate. Also along the financial line, what I do at my school is we have learning fees that is part of the tuition. So we are able to use those student learning fees to help pay for students participating when it's part of the curriculum. So that's what I do in my class. In terms of getting students prepared, one thing that I do in my class is I teach several different levels of cybersecurity, an intro and some advanced ones. I require my intro students to participate in NCL, and then I also encourage and in some of my classes require them to participate for my labs and curriculum. So what I do is I pair them up. So for what we have in NCL is the practice game. The practice game is just that. They can practice and they can work together. So I pair up students who have participated with students who haven't participated and have them, learn from the students, because that's one thing that I see is students tend to learn maybe even better from other students than they are learning from me. They seem to open up and they get encouraged, and it's also good for students who have participated because then that gives them when you're teaching, that's a great way for them to learn the material even better. So I feel like that's a great symbiotic relationship between students who have participated and brand new students to encourage and learn along the way.
Fantastic. Jake, how about your take on this? How can we make cybersecurity competitions more accessible to all students?
Thanks. I will follow up on one of Franz's comments. Often the challenge is not financial or access, it's do they think that competition is for them? And I believe there is a stigma or a feeling out there that it's for competitions are for the 10 most highly educated and competitive students in any program. And I think that together, we competition organizers have slowly disassembled that stigma and allowed people to understand that cyber competitions are for everyone. They're not just about winning. They're about learning. They're about preparation for the workforce. They're about the development of Morgan's critical skills. There is a lot more going on in competition. It is not just highly competitive students doing everything that they can to win. And I think that faculty and staff across all of the education community can encourage good learners to be a part of competitions, not just the most competitive students in a program.
Oh, that's great. It's good points. So Morgan and Dan, I'll let you wrap this one up.
I want to mention a professional association. NCyTE, we have a very close relationship with. And in the local chapter that we have, part of their budget is supporting students to participate in competitions. And I believe at the international level, NCyTE has supported National Cyber League in competitions. So I really believe the more partners you have, the more success you're going to have. Look for these partners, look for the professional associations. Morgan, you want to add to that?
Yeah, first of all, if you can start with Cyber Patriot, Cyber Patriot has an excellent program. So if you have a Title I school or an all-girls minority team, your tuition or your entrance fees are free. That's number one. Number two, I took a page from David's playbook, and we are now starting to use NCL labs in some of our courses. NCL as the lab, and City University is a little bit different. We appeal to adult learners. I actually met my first 18-year-old last year, and I'd been there 5 years. So we have older adults who are coming into this. So we have tried incorporating this into our courses. We have a cybersecurity club. I tell any student, even if they're taking it as part of their course, if they give me their scouting report for both the individual and the team competition, I have a little bit of money in my cybersecurity center. I will reimburse them. We are trying to partner with ISSA, And the other thing I've started doing with the teachers grants, we filled up our high school teacher grant, but we have it in the chat for middle school, Gen Cyber, and our latte in the state of Washington, is that we include some money to seed the idea in the middle schools where they can start doing competitions. We also try to use Pico, some of the free competitions, to get the idea started so that people can see that this is actually fun. And then one other thing, I want to give a shout out to a colleague, Stu Steiner in Eastern Washington University. Mark, you probably work closely with him. He's doing what they're doing in California, what we're doing here in Renton, Washington. We're taking high school, college student teams. The college students are going into the high schools to coach their teams. It's a recruitment tool. But now I'm finding out that the high school robotics team is now going to middle school to recruit these kids. It's the same playbook. We can be doing this and they will learn from older students. So there are a lot of strategies there and a lot of low cost, inexpensive and free competition structures that you can do.
Okay, great. So we have a little time left. We have about 5 minutes. So just maybe one or two questions from the audience. If you put your question in the chat already, just go ahead and go off mute and ask the question. If not, I'll ask the question. Yeah, there was one
Hi,
in there
Steven.
about. Okay, go ahead.
Hi, it's Max Gorbaczewski. I do have one question. With competitions in my school, I'm constantly having issue involving local students. All the students that live on campus come from other towns. Those students are active in all the campus activities. Local students, they have families, friends, things going on, and I rarely get any of the local students participate. Has anyone had the same issue, and how do you address it?
Max, do you have a club?
Yes.
Because in my opinion, it's not the teacher that really motivates the students. It's the peers that motivate each other. And so the club to me is a great vehicle for that.
Oh, I totally agree, but local students don't even come to the club. No matter how many times we tell them, I talk about it, and we all talk about it in classes, between classes, in meetings. Local students finish the class, pack up the backpack, and go.
Max, City University is 80% virtual. I have a student in Ghana that was coming to our cybersecurity club, and it was midnight for her. We pushed the virtual because traffic in Seattle is legendary. It's a parking lot. So you've got to meet them where they are. The other thing, and I'm going to go to what Dan was saying, we have a student, a club leader right now who's 34 years old, works for Boeing, has his CISSP, and is not technical. He's going back and learning. He's loving NCL, by the way, Franz. He's having a ball. And this guy is an amazing facilitator. We now have 18 to 25 people showing up because he's very charismatic. Our quarter is over. Somebody started a meeting in between quarters. We had nothing scheduled. We had 10 people in a meeting. It's building that momentum. And I'm still learning. Everybody is still learning. It's a challenge. We learn from each other. So try that. And I'm going to follow up with Brandon today, Dan, because he's in Red Team.
Right.
I think we need to share solutions because there isn't just one. But it's always going to be about relationships. Francis.
Thank you.
I was going to add very briefly to that, like we've seen this kind of across the board as a big challenge, whether it's local versus, students who are commuting further or remote. It's not necessarily an easy solution, but like typically what we see is that the teams that are most engaged, most successful, they just kind of like, they have their little friend group there, and they're all just having fun together, right? So I don't know if there's anything that you can do to kind of like, you know, opportunities to kind of facilitate ways for people to have fun and make that be an activity that they're doing, not because it's an extracurricular, but it's just a fun thing that they're doing with their friends. Yeah, the teams that we've seen that were successful are the ones that are going to be spending all night in the computer lab, just getting a pizza and just hanging out together, and it's not because they're kind of being, given that, hey, this is going to be helpful for you as an extracurricular. It's a fun activity. But unfortunately, I don't know how to implement that, easily at scale.
Yeah, I was going to
Okay.
add, do you give them pizza? That was a good question, Franz.
Yeah.
I know pizza's a good idea sometimes.
I do.
I was also good. I was going to add too, we try to meet them where they're at. So we have a Discord server set up for the club, and that it seems like some of my students kind of need that baby step to get involved in. They'll first get involved over Discord because that's less intimidating, and then they get engaged that way, and then they build the confidence to come to the meeting. So it's kind of like a several step process for them to join.
Okay, thank everyone. Thank you all, panel. I think this has been great. Mike, you want to wrap this up?
Yeah, thank you everybody for attending. Some really great tips on cybersecurity competitions. And I'll try to get all this stuff out probably Wednesday. I realized I'm on vacation until Wednesday. I did put a link in the chat. Please fill out the evaluation. It really helps us, gives us feedback, and our evaluator's happy, and she can tell our visiting committee if we're doing a good job or not. Plus, we use your feedback to develop the schedule. And what's really important is we enjoy reading our comments, especially when we get the 5-star reviews. But we read them all. So please give us an evaluation. Have a great weekend. And thanks again for attending our NCyTE monthly meeting. Take care, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Have a good weekend.
Bye.